You're watching PM Agenda. As we mentioned a little earlier, the Treasurer, Joe Hockey, has used the final party room meeting of government MPs before the budget 7 weeks away to spell out what the actual budget strategy is going to be, and in doing so has essentially confirmed that they will only return to surplus as soon as possible. So no fixed time, where the previous budget papers from a few months ago had suggested a 2019-20 return to surplus. No longer is the government fixed on a particular date for returning the budget to surplus. He said that this budget will be about boosting growth, boosting economic growth, rather than cutting spending. For some reaction to this, I'm joined now by Clive Palmer, the leader of the Palmer United Party. Thank you for your time. You've been saying for a while that we don't have a budget crisis and that our debt levels aren't a big problem. You think you've been vindicated?
I think we have been, and I think it's good that the Treasurer and the government's now saying we've got to grow the economy, got to create the jobs, we've got to go forward. This country can really do to reach its full potential. We're waiting with bated breath now that we've won the fight to say that our debt levels are low. We need to do more than that. We need to improve a lot of the economy. You've got government finances, and the government's position in financing is separate from the actual economy. The economy is taking a battering because there's no confidence out there, because there's no consistency in government policy. We've got to make sure it gets consistent.
Do you accept the government, though, is still committed to budget repair, even if it is over a longer period of time?
Well, I think it's just all a furphy, really. If you look at debt, for example, since 1750, there's only been 2 years where the United States hasn't been in debt. That's a couple of 100 years. And, of course, the US is the preeminent economic power in the world.
They've had a few more surpluses than that.
Well, the surpluses, but I'm talking about actually carrying debt. So carrying debt's not actually a bad thing, right? If you can create more assets, create more wealth for your citizens and create more revenue. And of course, the government's been spectacularly unsuccessful in creating revenue and growth. And of course, growth will make it happen.
Well, how much debt is too much debt then? Because we've had this argument about the intergenerational report showing 50 to 60% debt to GDP is, in the Prime Minister's words, pretty good by world standards. Do you agree with him?
Yeah, it is pretty good. Germany, for example, today has got 55% GDP debt, and they're one of the preeminent economic powers in Europe. And we've got around about 14% of GDP. It's reported as 16.6 because the Treasurer lifted the debt ceiling to give him some sort of substance to support his arguments. But that's not really bad. If we go to the United Kingdom today, they've got 85% of their GDP as debt. We go to the United States, it's much higher. We go to Japan, it's much higher.
So Clive Palmer and Tony Abbott are on a unity ticket in relation to the extent of debt that we should aim for?
I think that's right. I think really that's not the problem. The real problem is unemployment in our country. The real problem is the standard of living that's declining, and the government needs to do things to create wealth.
So then we get to how you do that, and how you do things that are going to grow the economy. And the government's focus, as it's spelled out today, is families through childcare changes and small business as well. Is that the right approach?
Yeah, well, small business is a key. It's a driver of our economy. It produces a lot of jobs.
What would you do to help small business?
Well, as you know, our policy is to remove provisional tax, stop small businesses paying tax before they've earned the money, and so they can pay it at the end of the year when they've made the money. That would release $70 billion in the economy to create more jobs, more growth, more government revenue. And of course, each time that $70 billion turns over, it creates an extra $10 billion, extra $7 billion of GDP.
Doesn't that mean $70 billion missing for at least 12 months from government coffers?
It does.
And that adds to the interest bill significantly.
It does. So you're talking about $800 in that instance. If it turns over 3 times during the year, the GST is $21 billion alone. So if you're in business, that's not a bad deal. You invest, you pay $800 million, you get $21 billion back. Even thick-head politicians should understand that. And of course, you get more revenue, you get more growth, you save money from people moving from gainful employment to unemployment. And there's not one small business in this country that's got enough money. Talk to them, they'll tell you. And they're the number one supporters of the Liberal Party. Tony Abbott, you need to get those votes off Palmer United if you're going to win the next election.
What about the childcare changes that the government's talking about?
Well, childcare is important because it frees women to work more, gives them the opportunity to contribute to our economy, and it creates more demand. So I think what they're doing in childcare, what I've seen so far, is a step in the right direction, but it's got to be combined with an overall economic growth package. If we have a look at what's happened in the United States with President Obama, you've seen the US economy come back with the stimulus that they've done there. You've seen Europe adopt those policies, and we're yet to see the Australian government come out with a comprehensive program, which I'm sure they're working on, but we'll show them how to do it if they can't do it.
Now, a few other things that the government is still hoping to be able to do, although we're not entirely sure when. Pension changes, changing to the indexation and also the access age. You've been pretty firm on this all along.
Well, of course, if you have a look at the growth in our superannuation graphs, I think, which we gave you, to have a look at 3033, you'll see there's no need for any of that. We don't have to bring people and make them suffer in our economy. We haven't got that sort of need. And they're things at the margin. The main thing is to get growth and get the economy moving. And I'm sure we can do that. Once we do that, all those things take care of themselves.
And higher education, again, we heard the Prime Minister today, they remain committed to deregulation despite the defeat in the Senate last week. If they did come back with something that's just deregulation and not any of the other elements of it, where would you stand on that?
Well, basically, Australia's got the highest enrolments in university per capita in the world. We've got the highest number of Australians going to secondary school in the world, and that's a pretty good education policy. The fact that our universities are rated in the 30s or 40s instead of in the top 10 is not a major problem. I mean, we don't want to have to compete with Harvard, Cornell, Oxford, Cambridge. I mean, what we want is participation. And of course, our GDP growth, it was the highest in the Western world up to the end of last year at 3.3% average, and that's because we had a high participation in education. Education is not just a good social policy, it's a good economic policy too.
You've gone from holding the balance of power in the Senate to just having one crossbench senator. Does that change the political dynamic in terms of dealing with the government? Do you think you need to help them out a little bit more to make yourself more relevant?
Well, we're hoping to be relevant with the ideas we've got. Of course, the people that have left us have still voted in accordance with our policies and ideas, which they were elected under, and I think we continue to have an impact that way. But it's not just in the Senate, it's about the future, about what we could do. You're sort of limited in the Senate because you're going to react to what the government does. Now we've got them to admit the debt's not a problem. We'll be touring Australia after the budget, laying out the economic policies that will get this country back on its road, and we hope that the government will adopt some of them. We hope either the Labor or Liberal parties will adopt them, because it's the battle of ideas that makes our country great. It's ideas that really matter, and that's what we'll be projecting.
But have we seen the Palmer United Party past its peak?
I don't think so.
You didn't win any seats in Queensland. We've got the New South Wales election on Saturday where you're not going to pick up seats, but now your Senate support or your Senate numbers have gone down to 1. How confident are you that things are going to bounce back?
Well, our membership keeps increasing. That's the first thing. Party membership, so you have to look at that. Before the last federal election, our support, according to the polls, was 0.1 of 1%. Now they're saying it's 2%. So, that's pretty good. We've gone up by about 20 times or something. So, I think we'll do pretty well. When you look at the news poll just recently, they said that the support was, 11% for others, 12% for the Greens, and so much for Liberal and Labor. But, of course, there's only 4 parties that stand in every House of Representatives seat, and we're one of them. So, who else is other? That's what they won't tell you. And that's why they continue to classify us and others in the House of Reps. And the House of Reps is what really matters in forming a government the next election.
Well, to that end, will you definitely run again in Fairfax?
Yeah, we'll be running candidates in every House of Representatives.
Including yourself?
Yeah, and also in the Senate, because, everyone said before the last election I couldn't win. My support in my electorate was 0.1 of 1%, and now they're saying it's whatever, something more than that. So we're in a better position than we've ever been. But it doesn't matter what happens to me. It matters what happens to this country. I donate all my salary to charity, not like any other politician in this place. And I'm only in it for one reason, because I think I've got an obligation to the Australians to do the best I can for them.
Which brings me to my final question. Are you worried about your own finances? You're donating all your salary. I read in the Australian today that you're losing money fairly rapidly in terms of your private...
Well, poor old Headley used to write that the Chinese are not paying me anything, and now they're still not paying me anything, so that hasn't changed. But all you need in life, mate, is to have a woman that loves you, right? Have a warm bed at night, enough to pay for a good meal, and you'll be quite happy. I'm pretty happy. I can live on $20 or $30 million a year and rough it pretty hard. I just hope that Headley can as well.
Sure, I could live on that too if I had to. Clive Palmer, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon.
God bless you.
We'll take a break and